Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and this week we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the myths and misconceptions around listening and especially observing nonverbal communication, making some of our interpretations and judgments of what we see and hear. We certainly don't have time to dive into all of them, and in future episodes, we'll pick some different categories and dive in deeper. But we certainly want to begin to talk about what are some of the myths and misconceptions we fall into and what allows that to happen. And probably the best place to start is understanding how the complexities of regular everyday communication get compounded by factors we often don't stop to consider. The first and the most obvious is going to be distractions, what's going on around us, from our phones in our pockets to our computers in front of us to everything going around, other people talking. For some of us, maybe it's clicking sounds or flashing lights or other things happening in the environment, cars going by, other conversations nearby. Our own internal conversation can be a distraction that causes us to miss and make ill-informed judgments on some of the communication that we've received. Communication styles is a big one. Many of us have different communication styles. That doesn't even begin to start taking into consideration cultural differences. And you don't have to be from a different country to have a different culture of communication. Here in the United States, you don't even have to be from a different state, depending on organizational expectations, family expectations, how we were raised. It goes on and on and on. And if you're going to break down cultural, then we start getting into language barriers. It could be a different accent from within the same language. It could be a different use of slang. For those of us with kids, sometimes it certainly feels like our kids are speaking different languages than we are. Of course, if somebody does come from another country, they do speak a different language. Now, not only their word choice, but their speech patterns and their timing and their tone and the congruency of their body language and what they say can all be different. And we need to develop the ability to count for that. We often don't take into consideration the environment around us when we are engaging in an interaction with somebody else. Is it loud? Is it quiet? Are there bright lights? Is it dark? Is the sun shining in from the window? Do we feel like we're compressed? Do we feel like there's too much space? Are there transient people coming in and out? Is there somebody else in the environment who the people we're talking with know or recognize? And that starts to make them uncomfortable. There's a long list of reasons. Not even to begin mentioning our own emotions, our own perceptions and preconceived notions. Of course, we could talk about our attitudes and our biases. We spent plenty of time in previous episodes talking about our expectations. And on top of all of that, we often don't stop to think about how our behavior impacts how people communicate with us. That could be how close or far away we're standing, what angle we're standing at, the look on our face. Do we appear to be standing as if we're, rigid and at attention and tense, or too loose and too relaxed? Are we maintaining too much eye contact to react in a way that we didn't realize our behavior leaked out? Again, the list is a million things long, but if we don't stop to recognize that as we are trying to identify hidden value and concealed opportunities to move relationships forward and achieve our agendas or initiatives, if we don't take into account all of these other things that are impacting our communication, we can find ourselves in real trouble, because now we could be misattributing behaviors. We could be misinterpreting behaviors. We could just flat be missing them. Our interpretations could be misinformed. Our expectations could be driving what we see. Some of this we've talked about before, but developing the situational awareness, which we're going to have to eventually dedicate at least one of these conversations to, becomes critical. So we touched on a couple of these in the last episode, but it probably makes sense to touch on them again real quick. Just from a straight nonverbal communication standpoint, we want to bust a couple of myths right now. The first one out of the gate to help drive this point home is crossed arms. All too often, we're told that if somebody crosses their arms, they're defensive. It's possible, but in some situations, it's probably unlikely. People generally cross their arms for two reasons: emotional vulnerability and physical discomfort. So if somebody crosses their arms, could it be because the air conditioning just turned on? Could it be because their chair is uncomfortable? Could it be because they're over hungry? I don't have her permission to tell this story, but once my wife and I had a meeting with some folks at my son's school, and we'd gone out to lunch before. And my wife had spilled some salad dressing. I spill stuff on myself all the time. And so when we sat down for the meeting, my wife had her handbag on her lap and her arms crossed because there was a stain on her shirt after lunch. I could see the people that we were talking with react to her cross her arms, and actually kind of moved back a little bit. My wife wasn't defensive at all. She was potentially a little bit embarrassed, sorry, sweetie, about the stain that was on her shirt. Again, this situational awareness becomes so very important. Now, when we talk about emotional vulnerability, yeah, that includes defensiveness. It also includes embarrassment. It also includes making difficult decisions. It also includes confusion or having trouble making decisions or any number of other mental or emotional states. So we said before, single factor decisions are deadly. We want to make our evaluations and interpretations based on the totality of circumstances, as many alert signals or factors that we can interpret at one time. And we want to continue to test those and look for either supporting behaviors or contradicting behaviors as the interactions continue, not even just today, but over time. So we can continue to test and validate our assumptions, our interpretations, and what we believe we're learning about people in our relationships. So if somebody crosses their arms, the look on their face is going to be very important. The general posture, direction of their body, their feet, their shoulders is going to be important. The timing, when a behavior happens, is more important than what behavior changes. So did the air conditioner just turn on? Did somebody else walk in the room? Did something else change in the moment that could have contributed to that behavior? Right away, when somebody crosses their arms, please don't just assume that they're defensive. The second one is eye contact. Most of us at some point growing up were told, look at me when I'm talking to you, so I know you're telling the truth and you're not lying. Well, Charles Bond really helped us out because he conducted, I think, what we can call a thorough set of research studies, interviewing over 4,800 people from over 75 countries. Pretty sure that meets the minimum requirements. And in his studies, he found that by far and away, the number one single biggest myth associated with detecting deception globally is eye contact. And the scientific community is clear. There is no correlation whatsoever between eye contact and truth or deception. To speak generally, people will more often hold eye contact, maintain eye contact within their individual comfort levels and cultural norms when they are not feeling stress. Most people will break eye contact, deviate eye contact when their stress levels rise, considering their personal norms, their cultural expectations, and the specificities of a given situation. So if we just assume that somebody's not being honest because they can't look at us, or if we just assume that somebody is being honest because they are maintaining eye contact, we are already behind the observation and gathering intelligence game. Because somebody has been through this a lot before, they're probably going to be pretty comfortable looking us right in the eye and being less than honest. And if somebody is new to a given situation, new to a relationship, new to a conversation, discussing a topic that causes them to feel stress at any level, especially if it's embarrassment or anxiety, we would expect those individuals to maintain less eye contact as well. So let's throw the eye contact one out. So that's probably a good jumping off point to talk just a little bit about truth and deception. And yes, at some point, we're probably going to have to do a whole series of conversations on truth and deception to hit as many of the valuable points as we can. But to speak in general terms, most of the behaviors, nonverbal especially, but verbal as well, that we have been told are associated with deception are actually associated with discomfort, with the overall operating assumption that people are uncomfortable when they lie and they're comfortable when they tell the truth. I think our previous example about eye contact shatters that myth sufficiently. So what we really need to stop and think about is just because somebody's blink rate changes, or just because they're scratching their nose, or just because they're shifty, or just because they're playing with their feet, maybe they're illustrating, they're watching themselves do something for a reason to break eye contact, that could very well be indicative of an emotional shift. Not going to give you much of an argument there. But what that emotional shift is has a whole lot to do with the people who are talking, the nature of their relationship, the topic of the conversation, the potential consequences associated with that conversation, the environment the conversation is having in, as well as other factors. So to just assume that somebody looks uncomfortable means they're being dishonest, it's absolutely the improper, inaccurate, and quite honestly, harmful way to look at it. So, as we continue these conversations, what we really want to focus on, as we say it again, is developing that situational awareness, but really working on separating not just accuracy from inaccuracy, but what are valuable observations that help us achieve our goals and build relationships versus what are invaluable observations that confirm an assumption, a bias, a myth, a misconception that might be misguiding how we're interacting in a given conversation. A lot of times when we talk about this, people might interject and say, well, you know what? Once I was having a conversation with my kid, my coworker, hopefully not, but sometimes my spouse, a friend, whoever. And we were talking, their behavior changed. And as soon as their behavior changed, I knew they were lying. Okay, maybe, but you didn't know they were lying on the spot. That behavior was indicative of potential dishonesty to you because of something you either knew prior to that moment or something you verified after that moment. You also had developed a relationship with that person over time, so you had a reasonable idea of how they normally communicated with you in similar situations, and you were able to spot when they deviated from that norm, and your contextual or your situational awareness of what was going on in that situation helped you assign a meaning to that behavior that later on turned out to be correct. So I'm not saying that you're wrong when you arrive at that. I would just really, really, really ask that everybody step back and recognize that it wasn't the behavior that caused us to believe in that situation someone was lying and it turned out to be true. It was the totality of the situation that that behavior occurred in. The history of the relationship and the knowledge base of communication styles, either the information we had prior to the conversation and or the information we verified after the conversation. The personal relationship, the history, the change in the moment, all of those things went into that evaluation. So often it's very easy to say, oh, this means that, when in reality, subconsciously, whether we realize it or not, all these other factors were in play. And if you saw that exact same person exhibit that exact same behavior shift in a different conversation in a different time, you likely would have assigned a different meaning to it. So please recognize often that the greater context, the greater situation is what is driving our assumptions and driving our interpretations, not the specific behavior themselves. And that is so important to keep in mind. So if we're going to talk about discomfort for a minute, well, Mike, if all these behaviors that we've been told mean deception could mean other things, what else could they mean? I don't know how many hours you have and how long a list you want to go through, but right off the top, we can talk about some sort of fear. Is it fear of detection? Oh no, he's going to know that I think something, I know something, I said something, I did something. Or is it going to be fear of disbelief? Oh no, I'm being completely honest here, but I'm worried they're not going to believe me. Fear is fear. It's by and large going to show up the same way. Only that contextual awareness is going to help us differentiate. Is it fear of detection or is it fear of disbelief? General nerves in any given situation. We're all going to experience them differently at different times, but somebody could just be nervous. They could be uncomfortable. Honestly, maybe they're uncomfortable with the clothes that they're wearing. Maybe they're uncomfortable with the food that they're eating. Maybe they're uncomfortable with somebody else who's in the room or within earshot. There's all kinds of things that could cause people to feel uncomfortable. How about unconfident? They're in a situation where they're not lying, they're not misleading anybody, they're just not feeling confident at this moment in time, so they start to exhibit behaviors that unfortunately get associated with dishonesty. They might be unconfident because they're unprepared. They feel surprised. They feel ambushed. Maybe they feel disappointed or embarrassed because they should be prepared for this conversation or they're not. Mentioning embarrassed, I mean, that should be its own category. We talked before, we'll continue to talk. That's often the number one reason why most adults will avoid taking risks. Not just adults, but kids too. We're happen to be focusing on adults in these conversations. It could even be confusion. I'm legitimately not sure what's going on around here. So the more we look at relationships and conversations in an iterative sense, as we are communicating with people, we're playing the long game, we're collecting intelligence, and we're studying how they like to communicate in various scenarios around various topics. That helps us establish patterns. Then we can begin to identify breaks in patterns. The other day, I picked my son up at school. We started driving away. We got maybe 5 minutes away from the school, and Gabe says to me, "Hey, how come you haven't called mom yet?" Great pattern recognition, dude. I talked to her on the way in. She knows I was coming to get you. She knows where we're at. She's going to meet us at home. We always call her after I pick you up. Yeah, today's a little different. He's already studying and picking up on pattern differences. We all do that. So now we need to begin paying attention to that. And again, over time, as these changes carry out, are they consistent? Are they different? How is it impacting relationships and initiatives? We don't want to look at someone's behavior change and just assume that means they're being honest or they're being dishonest. If they're showing us discomfort, what are the reasons that they could likely be showing discomfort based on the totality of the situation and everything we know about themselves, ourselves, the topic, the potential consequences, and the environment that we're in? These are all incredibly important considerations, which is why multitasking is the arch enemy of listening. If I'm trying to write notes while you're talking to me, I'm going to miss so many of these cues. If I'm looking at my phone while you're talking to me, I'm going to miss so many of these cues. If my phone is vibrating in my pocket while you're talking to me, I'm going to miss cues because now I'm starting to think about what's that message, who's trying to call me, what's that about. If you are standing in front of a window and I'm going squirrel, car, motorcycle, shadow, I could be missing very important cues. If the room is loud, if there's flashing lights. When my wife and I first started dating, I had to apologize and say, listen, I'm captivated by motion. It doesn't mean I'm not listening to you. But if there's a TV screen in the bar over your shoulder and it flashes to a really bright commercial and I look up, I'm not ignoring you. I saw the light change. We have to be aware of the distractions around us and how that draws us away from the conversation and paying attention. If that happens at an unimportant moment, who cares? If it happens at a critical moment, we could be making a faulty judgment or interpretation that could be harmful in any number of ways. Along the same lines, it's also important to consider that efficiency is the archenemy of great communication. We've mentioned it before. Time is the enemy of empathy. Time is the enemy of quality. If I'm trying to have a conversation as fast as I possibly can, or as effective as I possibly can, let's get to the point, let's get it on, let's move on. I could be missing out on any number of cues, environmental considerations, situational factors, because I am now focused on speed. I am not focused on quality. So let's remember those two things right out of the gate. Multitasking is the archenemy of listening, and efficiency is the archenemy of great communication. Which gets us down to a couple of potential, for lack of a better term, judgment errors that I've learned, and one, I don't know why that was so difficult for me to say, that I've learned and I want to share with you all as well. The first one comes from Robert Cialdini. If you're not familiar with Robert Cialdini's work, what are you waiting for? He's only written half a dozen of the best books on influence and persuasion ever. Go read every single word he's ever written. But one of the things that he talks about is how we are all capable of mistaking what is focal for what is causal. Meaning we're mistaking what we're focusing on for the cause of whatever we're experiencing. So if I'm having a conversation with somebody, and if any of you have seen a picture of me before, you understand where this came from. If I'm having a conversation with somebody and I'm thinking to myself, well, bald people are always angry with me. He must be angry with me because he's bald, and bald people are always angry at me. Well, now I'm not paying any attention or giving any consideration to how I'm standing, how I'm sitting, how close we are, my facial expressions, my word choice, my level of empathy, any opportunity I've given this individual to share their ideas, share their argument, make their point, give space in the conversation, all of these things. So it's important that, especially if we're in conflicting conversations, high impact conversations, sometimes conversations that took an unexpected twist, we stop and think, wait a minute. Am I really mistaking what I'm focusing on right now for the cause of this whole thing? I keep bringing my son up. It's probably the easiest. But for me, a common mistake could be, oh, he's hungry. He needs to eat something. Well, it's around lunchtime. That would make sense. Nah, turns out right now he's actually not hungry. He feels like I haven't been listening to him and ignoring him because I'm trying to work and have a conversation with him at the same time. And that's why he's upset. Very important consideration. Also, if I quote Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner here, they wrote Think Like a Freak and Freakonomics and in other books, and I highly, highly recommend, again, you read all of them. They talk about mistaking correlation for causality. Just because things happen together just because things happen in sequence or around the same time doesn't mean that one causes the other. The example that they give in Think Like a Freak is, okay, married couples tend to be, people in marriages tend to be happier. So ergo, married people must be happier people. Well, let's stop and think about it. Were the people happy before they got married? Well, then they're more likely to be happy in their marriage. Were the people unhappy before they got married? Well, then they're more likely to be unhappy in their marriage. So just because there's correlation between things, just because there's correlation between a behavior and something that was said, or something that was said and something that recently happened, doesn't mean that one caused the other. From a observation and listening standpoint, we talk all the time about the importance of patience. The more we listen, the more we observe, the more we learn, the more data points we have, the more informed decisions that we're making. Another thing to consider is this contextual or situational awareness. The more we can become aware of the totality of circumstances, everything that's going on around us, and work this into how we evaluate our observations, the interpretations, or I think the fair word is assumptions that we make, and then the actions that we take after in reference to the goals we're trying to achieve and the people we're trying to achieve them with, we will be more successful. We will make fewer mistakes. We'll achieve our goals easier. So we want to avoid mistaking what is causal for what is focal, and we want to avoid mistaking correlation for causality. So what do we need to do? We really need to work on focusing on listening to learn instead of listening to verify or validate. We've talked about expectations going into conversations before, assumptions. We'll dedicate one of these conversations to biases, and we'll pick a handful of the 185, 75, whatever it is, biases that we have, and we'll talk about those, give them some airtime and how they apply to many different conversations that we have. But in general, if we take our expectations or assumptions into any conversation, we can go back to crossing arms. If I'm getting ready for a conversation with an employee, it's going to be a performance management conversation. And I think, well, they're not going to be really happy about this. And I walk in and I sit down and I say, hey, Dennis, I really appreciate you coming in. Have a seat. And Dennis crosses his arms. And I immediately think to myself, wow, he got defensive fast. Did he? Did he get busted up playing rugby this weekend? And that's why he has to sit this way because his back is sore again? I don't know what's really going on. So now I'm bringing my expectations to life. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm observing to validate. I'm not observing to learn. The more we can force ourselves to maintain a learning mentality, the best we'll be. I'm a bit of a caveman. I'm not so much onto the tablet thing. I'm still more of a pen and paper guy. So when I go into a lot of my meetings, I'll actually write on top of the page, what did I learn today, in order to try to have that visual reminder that I need to learn. Beyond giving ourselves that additional reminder, I highly recommend at least two. There's more, but to wrap this up, I highly recommend asking ourselves at least two questions as checkpoints throughout our conversations. It's great if we can do it during. I know that gets into internal monologue and could be a distraction. Certainly in between and after conversations. One of the questions we want to ask ourselves is, what am I missing? Just what am I missing? Have I stopped to consider something in their personal life? Have I stopped to consider our previous relationship? Have I stopped to consider their expectations and fears? Have I stopped to consider other factors that could be impacting their work, their motivation, their discipline, their dedication, whatever it is, their output that we're having this conversation about? The more we can ask, what am I missing? The more we're forcing ourselves to stop and check our awareness of the totality of circumstances, educate ourselves, increase our empathy and deference to others as we look to find a better solution moving forward. And it also doesn't hurt. In fact, it's quite helpful to ask, are my assumptions driving my decisions? I assumed this was going to be a difficult conversation, and here it is. I assumed that this person was going to lie to me. They just scratched their nose. They must be lying. I assumed that they're not going to like my idea. I assumed. I've got a story that's in the book and I share in some of the programs I do, where just on a whim, because I couldn't help myself, I pulled into a dealership to see if I could get a deal on the pickup truck. I convinced myself before I got out of the car that I couldn't, but I had nothing to do that day, so I was just going to play a game and see if I could get it. I abandoned my normal negotiation strategy. By the time I realized I probably could have got the deal I wanted, it was too late. They had me locked in because my initial expectation drove an unhelpful series of decisions or actions that took me away from what could have been a positive outcome because I didn't believe that I could achieve it. Now, in the long run, I ended up with a better truck, so I'm happy. But in the short run, it was a pretty embarrassing situation that I had to look back and say, I screwed that up. That's not a them problem. They're not refusing to negotiate. They're not refusing to back off their deal. They're not refusing to consider other options. I led them down that road. To take an example from my own past, there was a particular interrogation that I had to go into, and quite literally that morning before I left the hotel and went in, I looked myself in the mirror and said, this guy's going to come after you. He's got a history. He's got a reputation. This is going to be the one. So stay calm. Be assertive, but be professional, and be ready for this guy to come after you. Well, when I brought that video, no, thankfully, I'd rather be lucky than good. I got the confession, everything we needed by the end of the conversation, but it was one of the greater roller coasters that I ever had to ride. Once I got it back and my former supervisors watched the video with me, I felt good, right? Successful ending. The other guy was the jerk. I wasn't the jerk. I made it through all the challenges he put in front of me, and then I got it what I needed at the end. We watched the video. Nah, I actually created several of those challenges by my tone, my posture, how I was interacting with him, because I assumed he was going to come after me. So I had a more assertive tone and posture that was necessary in that conversation. Upon further reflection, I created a fair amount of the challenges that I had to overcome in that conversation. So I shouldn't be proud that I overcame them. I should feel fortunate that I did. And I should be a little bit embarrassed that I knew better and still acted that way in that scenario. So the more we can ask ourselves, what am I missing? And are my assumptions driving my decisions? The more we can find clarity, the more we can question ourselves, and the more we can empathize with the people that we're talking to. I'm going to assume that in our personal and professional lives, most of the people we're talking to, we're in iterative relationships with. We're going to keep seeing with them. We're going to keep working with them. We're going to keep living with them. We're going to keep sharing meals with them, on and on and on. There's plenty of opportunities to learn. There's plenty of opportunities to grow. There's opportunities to identify old patterns. Some of them are good. Some of them need to change. There's plenty of opportunities to create new patterns in these relationships as well. If we're focusing on uncovering hidden value, moving relationships forward, moving initiatives forward, then the accuracy and the totality of our observations are critical, because those observations are going to drive what we think, what we say, and what we do, which are going to continue to fuel the cycle of communication. So please develop that situational awareness, start moving beyond some of these myths and misnomers, check yourself and your observations along the way, and watch the difference that it makes. I really appreciate you being here for another week and another episode. Thank you so very much for continuing to come back. Please, before you go, we really would appreciate it. Just take a second to subscribe to the show, like it, leave us your feedback in a review, please. And of course, if you could share it with your network, we would be grateful. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.